Multi-POV stories have always been important to me, especially when it comes to fantasy. So imagine my surprise discovering that not only do a significant portion of readers avoid books with that narrative structure, but so do publishing agents. Rather than trying to shame people into embracing what I love in a story, I'd like to celebrate the books that shaped me as a writer. Join me for a stroll down memory lane. I think what confuses me the most is pretty much every single TV show and movie is multi-POV. So why would the reception of books be different? Maybe it's visually easier to differentiate between characters than it is to read them on a page, but that can't be the entire explanation, right? And what would that mean for an audiobook? If a narrator used a distinct voice for each character, or there was a complete cast, would that solve the problem? Interesting. For me at least, even at a young age, books with multiple perspectives were just another way of telling a story. There wasn't anything remarkable about them. Maybe writing trends changed, or the decline in literacy is a bigger epidemic than I realized. But way back when, in the late 80s and early 90s, this kind of structure wasn't unusual even in children's books. The Hobbit was one of the earliest books to leave a huge mark on me. It was also a bonding experience. Hey, you. Come here. It was also a bonding experience. My mom would read it to me, for which I'm very grateful. While the book primarily follows Bilbo, it does have an omniscient narrator and occasionally breaks third-person limited. That set the table for me in a lot of ways. Not only was that fantasy world so engaging, but it prepared me for denser fantasy. I mean, check out this cover. It's iconic. Even when you take the dust jacket off, it looks incredible. I'm not even sure why medieval settings, knights, castles, and things of that nature grip me so much, but they do. Those were my favorite Legos, and I couldn't get enough of the armor exhibit at the Met. One of the major series that captivated me as a child was Redwall by Brian Jacques. These books went into the heads of the heroes, the villains, and everyone in between. It was a rich world full of imagination. All the characters were anthropomorphic animals, and I was super into that. That was kind of a recurring theme of the time. I think Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles primed me for it. Somewhat similar books like Watership Down were really rich emotional journeys. Here the animals didn't live in an abbey or wear clothes, but you cared deeply about them. The nuance and complexity really left a mark on me. Also, it's okay for a story to go to some dark places. Watership Downer, am I right? Sorry. The Rats of Nim are another series running with this animal theme, kind of like a blend of Watership Down and Redwall. Taking a bit of a swerve, here's another kid's book that had a lot of head hopping, The Indian in the Cupboard. What better way to fantasize about bringing your toys to life and celebrate casual racism? Man, things have changed a lot. They even made this into a movie. In life, influence comes in all shapes and forms. For me, video games played a huge role. One in particular changed my life. Final Fantasy VI, aka 3 as it was released in the US, is an incredible game. It's a groundbreaking RPG that truly doesn't have a main character. It's all about the cast. The story makes a point to characterize nearly everyone, and it even has narrative splits where the party gets separated and you have to play each part. Don't even get me started on the music. Hearing it, even to this day, almost makes me weep. In case you think I'm exaggerating about how much I love this game, I still have it. I rebought it for about $60 a few years ago. Worth every penny. Before we get into my preteen and teenage years, let's take a brief detour into an update. Everything is going well? Got some more followers? Steady growth? Thank you all for the support. Tammy interrupted me with a poopy butt that I needed to wipe, so I'm not sure exactly where I was. And by the way, I don't know if you can see, but she bit the shit out of my nose. Last week I had a job where I was down in San Diego the entire time, so I was a bit worried that I would stay on track with my writing. However, it ended up being a huge boon. I ended up with a ton of downtime at this fancy resort, so I used it to write and edit. I only have a few chapters to write for my second book, so I'm feeling thrilled. It was hard being away from Tammy for the week. I missed you. Did you miss me? Ooh, tough crowd. That said, I really need to get my advertising campaign back off the ground and continue to find ways to attract readers. Towards the end of my elementary school days, I stumbled across Terry Brooks, the Elfstones of Shannara in particular. My grandparents lived in California, so there were a lot of cross-country airplane flights, and I found it at the airport. It was exactly the kind of fantasy I was looking for at the time. I read a bunch of his books. I think I tried to read Lord of the Rings around this age, but I bounced off of it. The pace felt a little slow to me, and all of the poetry and songs were a little off-putting for me at the time. The Shannara books are frequently multi-POV, and while they owe a lot to Tolkien, they modernized that kind of story. Also around this time, the preteen years, I think I was having trouble finding books that really spoke to me. I'd aged out of things like Goosebumps, probably wasn't ready for adult fantasy, but felt like the books that were targeted at a younger audience were too childish. It was probably the result of so much angst. I was also a nerd who couldn't admit that he was a nerd. I started off with Magic the Gathering and moved into Warhammer, which is probably the nerdiest thing you can do, but for some reason, I refused to try D&D. Somehow the social stigma affected me, and I regret that now. I was also a hypocrite. I played the Star Wars tabletop game and the Men in Black one, but somehow D&D was too far? Whatever, man. But I think all of that provides some context for as I became a teenager and started to feel like a lot of fantasy just wasn't very well written. The sword and sorcery stuff never really did it for me, and the handling of female characters was largely not great. I don't remember reading a ton of fantasy books in my high school years. Maybe I was just busy with school or other responsibilities, or playing a lot of video games, I'm not sure. One exception was when the Lord of the Ring movies were announced. That seemed like the perfect opportunity to revisit the books, so I did, and I really liked them. I think I was more prepared for the story at that age. It was also fun to see fantasy on the big screen. Since the late 80s, there really wasn't a lot of that. When I got to college, I came across another book that had an outsized influence on me. Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World by Haruki Murakami. I took a Japanese film and literature class, and it was assigned as part of the course. I read it in about a day and a half. The parallel structure and writing style blew me away. I thought it was the coolest thing. It was such an inspiration that it inspired the original draft of my book nearly 20 years later. Finding Murakami put me on a more literary bent. I read every book of his I could get my hands on, straying away from more traditional fantasy for things like magical realism. I read some Michael Chambon around that time as well. Again, more of a literary bent than a genre-based one. A few years after that, I finally delved into Dune. I really enjoyed it. It's obvious why it's so influential and such a staple. My true return to fantasy started in my mid-20s. I can't remember if I read The Name of the Wind or Game of Thrones first. I read them around the same time. Whichever one was first reignited that passion in totally immersing myself in doorstoppers. When the Game of Thrones TV series was announced, I tore through the first 4 books. Honestly, I'm kind of glad I didn't start reading them in the 90s. Those were some long waits. I was rewarded for my slow adoption of both of these series with A Dance with Dragons and Wise Man's Fear in 2011. I was super excited that it didn't seem like I'd have to wait long to read the conclusions of these series. Oops. I'm totally sympathetic to authors taking the time they need, but 15 years is a long wait. After getting burned like that, I dabbled in Brandon Sanderson. That man is a machine. I liked Stormlight Archives quite a bit, but it didn't grip me the same way. I bounced off of it after a few books. I then vowed to read a series that was already completed. What better choice than Malazan Book of the Fallen? 10 doorstoppers to read. The epic nature of it is staggering. The world building, the complicated weave of characters. I was thoroughly impressed. By this time, I think I was around 30, and I'd finally played D&D. So that influence on Stephen Erikson's books was also appreciated. Speaking of Stephens, I'd never read a lot of Stephen King, but started reading The Dark Tower around this time. Once again, I'm grateful that I didn't have to wait for the releases. The latter books in that series have some cool multi-POV moments. Now we get into the final part of my reading journey, which is ongoing. After taking 5 years to write and reimagine my debut novel, I got serious about trying to get it published. When you're querying agents, you need to understand the book market, and you also need comp titles for your manuscript. Becoming a voracious reader seemed like the best response. Using Libby to borrow ebooks from the library was a complete game changer for me. I can't recommend it enough. This is going to be a bit of a lightning round. I started off with the Unhewn Throne trilogy. The author was kind enough to speak to me, and it was fascinating to talk to him about how the editing process changed the structure of his book. It went from balanced shifts between the 3 primary characters to a more uneven approach, one that I think he would argue ultimately served the story. And that's a fear I have. My story has a set cycle that swaps between characters, giving them equal page time, but is that truly serving the story I'm trying to tell? I hope so. There was some great world building in Brian Staveley's trilogy, and I really liked the characters. The complete game changer for me came when my childhood friend's wife recommended Live Ship Traders. I thought everything about it was incredible. The setting, the characters, the structure. Many people write it off as misery porn, but life is hard, man. You gotta balance the good with the bad, even when it comes to escapism. Ultimately, I really wish I read Robin Hobb when I was younger. She's a tremendous author. The Gale Song series is another one that hit close to home, especially the setting of my book. That series is fantastical, but is heavily based on 10th century Ireland. The inspiration for my setting comes from Ireland in the 13th century. There's a huge overlap in the names that Shauna, Lawless and I used, and she obviously did far more research. My book is much more anachronistic. I really enjoyed this series. I think it's a great example of balancing interpersonal dynamics with an epic story. The power progression of magic is also well handled. The city and its uncertain walls is a return to hard-boiled wonderland and the end of the world. It didn't capture me quite as much as Murakami's earlier work, but I think it was very effective. The endnotes also helped me have an epiphany. As I mentioned earlier, the original structure of my novel was parallel. You had these characters playing a tabletop game, and then you had the characters experiencing it as reality. Not only was I juggling far too many characters, I wasn't mature enough as an author to fully realize both of those stories. I was caught up by the ambition of it. At some point, I hope to revisit that story. I think it's worth telling. Rainwild Chronicles is another multi-POV series by Robin Hobb that includes some of the same characters. I thought this was excellent as well. However, the ending felt a bit rushed to me. I dabbled with The Judging Eye, but I hadn't read any other books in the series, so that one kind of lost me, and I didn't feel compelled to go back to the beginning. The Daughters' War was a lot of fun. I liked it more than Black Tongue Thief, and used this as one of my comps. The narrative is intriguing. You follow a main character, but then you read letters from a secondary one. That was a cool way to switch it up. The 5th season nearly made my head explode. In this book, you alternate between first, second, and third perspectives. Beyond choose-your-own-adventure books, I'm not sure anything I've read has been in the second person. That was very jarring, but trust me, it serves the story. This one is really worth checking out. City of Last Chances was one I enjoyed a lot. I hadn't read much by this author, and I'd check out some of their other works. The setting and cast was really well done, and it worked in ways for me that another book struggled to, that I didn't finish, called Age of Ash. Who knows? Maybe I wasn't in the right headspace, but for whatever reason, that book didn't grip me. City of Last Chances, however, has some really cool moments. The Shadow of Gods is one that I enjoyed reading, but I had no real interest in continuing the series. The same is true with The Art of Prophecy. There's a lot of cool stuff here. The Kung Fu fantasy blend, using acupuncture as an offensive weapon, but the collective cast really didn't hold my attention. And that's one of the biggest dangers of multi-POV stories. If readers don't like specific characters, you're in a lot of trouble. The Grace of Kings is an Asian-inspired fantasy book that I loved. It's an epic with a Romance of the Three Kingdoms kind of feel, and a pantheon of gods. I also found the writing style fascinating. It kind of reads like a history book, almost. It's hard to describe, but I recommend it. Gods of the Weirdwood is another one that I enjoyed. There's some really, really cool world building and creatures in it, but it didn't compel me to continue the series. While it was cool to see into the minds of some of the villainous characters, their motivations didn't really engage me. Like Age of Ash, there are a few books that I did not finish. These include The Quincunx, Antkind, and Remarkably Bright Creatures. A big reason I didn't finish some of these massive books is the library loan period is only 3 weeks. Unless you're really hammering it out every day, it's hard to get through a book this thick. With Remarkably Bright Creatures, I think spite played a role. Octopuses are amazing, and it's cool to see a mainstream multi-POV story, but the characters just didn't work for me. The young man was just like, I don't really know what to do. I don't like getting anything. Life sucks. It felt like the mirror image of a male author writing a female character poorly. Also, they just straight up threw money at that book. Share some of that wealth, please. Currently, I'm reading The Vor, which is intense. I'm not sure how I feel about it yet. And there you are, a perhaps incoherent and unnecessary tour through my history of multi-POV books. If you haven't read any of the stories I recommended, please check them out. And if you have any recommendations of your own, please leave them in the comments below. Should we wrap this up, Tampy? Tampy? Shh, she's asleep.